my hope is that I can explain the purpose of chiropractic to you all and its unique offering as a healing art. But before I do that, I have to cover some principles that are involved with health and well-being and ultimately chiropractic. So the first is life force, and no one really knows or truly understands what life force is, but we know it's the difference between a living body and a lump of clay. We know that life force uses electricity to carry information. So for example, if the brain wants to communicate to a certain part of the body, an electrical impulse will fire off from the brain. It'll travel down the spinal cord, out the spinal nerves to any system, organ, tissue, or cell that the brain wishes to communicate, and vice versa, the body back up to the brain, ultimately the nervous system. And here's a nice little example of electricity traveling through a living body. In this case, it's the tree. So, all living bodies have certain characteristics, and one characteristic of a living body is that it has an innate wisdom or an innate ability to survive, heal, adapt, and thrive. And a good example is that is if you cut your finger, you don't have to think about healing it. It does it all on its own. So there's infinite examples I could use, but I think one of the best is the cut finger, because you cut your finger and before you know it, you put a Band-Aid on it and you take the Band-Aid off a couple days later and the wound is completely healed. Now, the innate wisdom, the innate intelligence of the body, it needs something to drive and carry out all the functions and processes of the body. So it's going to use chemistry. It's going to use a certain brain and body chemistry, because all human performance, anything and everything you do, depends upon body chemistry. And not only body chemistry, but a balanced body chemistry. The more balanced the body and brain chemistry is, the better the overall function of the body is going to be. Now, the nervous system, which controls and coordinates every function of every single cell in your body, and when I say nervous system, I'm talking about your brain and your spinal cord, the central nervous system to be exact. The central nervous system controls everything. It runs the whole show. And the endocrine system, okay, here's a nice little shot of that. The endocrine system is responsible for making all the hormones and all the chemicals in your body that carry out all the functions. But a balanced body chemistry depends upon how well the nervous system can communicate with the endocrine system. So, like I said, the nervous system controls and coordinates every function of every single cell in your body, but it's also a highway of communication between the brain and the body. And here's a nice little shot of the neurospinal system. You got the brain, the spinal cord, and then, oh wait a minute, there you go. And then all the vertebra of the spine there. Right? So an example of the brain and the body communicating together. Say we were all on a hike and we came around the turn in the trail and there was a bear or the mountain lion. That information is going to come into the brain, into our nervous system, and our nervous system is going to communicate with the endocrine system, and it's going to tell the endocrine system, you need to start making adrenaline and cortisol ASAP. Because the adrenaline, it's going to elevate blood pressure, it's going to elevate the heart rate, it's going to release all this energy which you need to run or to fight for your life. And the cortisol is going to be produced because in these extreme physical circumstances, you're going to damage the tissue, and the cortisol is going to be there to resolve that and heal the tissue. Another example is digestion. So before you even put that chocolate in your mouth, your brain has communicated to your pancreas, telling it to produce digestive enzymes to break down that food and extract the nutrients. And it also told the pancreas to start producing insulin and glucagon to regulate those blood levels. Another example is reproduction. It's how we all got here. And if you think about all the chemicals and all the hormones that had to be created in balance from the time of courtship to the time a newborn baby, a baby was born, it's nearly infinite. And all that was dependent upon how well the nervous system can communicate with the endocrine system to make a balanced body chemistry. So once again, the neurospinal system. So we've discussed how the nervous system controls and coordinates everything. But what else it is, it's a bridge. It's a bridge between you and what is. And what I mean by that is that everything you see, everything you touch, you smell, you taste, you hear, and you intuit is going to feed information into the central nervous system. And the central nervous system is going to interpret, edit it, and dispense that information. So a perfect example of that is our vision, what we see, right? Now here's the kicker. What we're seeing isn't actually what is. See, information is going to come through our eyes, down our optic nerve, to the occipital lobe, where that information is then interpreted, edited, and rewritten. And then that's what we see. So the nervous system, another thing that it does is that it records information from your life experiences. Any physical, mental, emotional, or chemical events that it deems important or that are overwhelming in some way is going to get stored. But it gets stored as tension. And as the tension accumulates over time, it begins to pull the structure out of alignment. When the structure comes out of alignment, okay, structure and function have a relationship. So when the structure comes out of alignment, the brain and body can't communicate optimally with one another. So any relationship that doesn't have good communication will break down. So the brain and body can't communicate optimally with one another. Then that means the brain and the endocrine system cannot communicate optimally with one another, which leads to a possible unbalanced body chemistry and overall lack of performance. So the process I just explained of the interference of communication between structure and function, in chiropractic we call this process subluxation. Now I'm going to take a look at the tail end of subluxation here. So subluxation is defined as one or more vertebrae of the spine coming out of its most appropriate alignment, putting pressure on the spinal cord and spinal nerves, which, by the way, are those highways of communication. And that pressure on those highways of communication creates that interference of communication between the brain and the body. So, for example, this right here is a subluxated vertebra, okay? And we have a possible herniated disc that could happen, which could be painful and is an issue, but it's not the issue. This is the issue. This spinal nerve is a highway, it's a pathway of communication. But that pathway is getting closed off by the subluxation, by the vertebra coming out of alignment. So whatever at the end of this path cannot receive messages from the brain optimally and cannot communicate back to the brain optimally. So whatever at the end of this pathway here is not going to be able to express life and its potential and health and well-being to its fullest capability. Now, the thing is that this whole process can happen without us ever feeling pain. Symptoms are usually the last thing to show up. So a symptom of a heart that isn't functioning correctly is a heart attack. Most people that unfortunately have this don't even know they had a problem until it occurs. And symptoms in general are really interesting because for the most part, they're actually processes of adaptation. They're processes of healing. So let's say, for example, we have a tight muscle in our neck or in our back. We may think, wow, I have this tight muscle in the back. I need it to relax, or maybe I need it to stretch it. Well, that tight muscle may be serving you because maybe the brain told that muscle to contract, to stabilize what was unstable in your neck. So symptoms aren't always comfortable, but it's quite possible that they are processes of healing and they're there to serve us. It's just that we don't like, the symptoms are messengers, but we don't really like what they have to say sometimes. So this word, subluxation, it's interesting. Because when you break the word down, it means less than light, which brings me to a really interesting story. So I have a client in New York City who became a good friend of mine. He's a quantum physicist, and he would grill me about chiropractic all the time. He was really into it. He was a brilliant scientist, and he would tell me, he'd say, Mattie, this word subluxation, when you break it down, it means less than light, which is really interesting from a quantum physicist point of view, because you see, everything you see is not the way it is. Reality is mostly empty space and particles of light. And that's what life is made of, empty space and particles of light. So when you tell me that this word subluxation, I break down, means less than light, what it means to me as a quantum physicist is less than life. And that's perfect, because that's exactly what's happening when the neurospinal system goes through subluxation. Less than life is able to be expressed because there's that cutoff, there's that interference of communication between the brain and the body. So the life force cannot flow across the nervous system as was intended to. And then whatever cannot have that life force flowing there optimally cannot be expressed. It can't thrive. It can't express health and vitality and well-being. Now, subluxation has a beginning, has an origin, and it starts in two places. One, in the womb, because whatever your mother was experiencing, it's quite possible that you were experiencing. So if she was having a stressful time, that information, that information can get stored in the baby's nervous system as tension. And also at the time of birth, depending how the birth process was, because if the doctor assists and has to turn the baby's head to line up the shoulders with the birth canal, that physical stress on the baby's upper cervical spine can pull the structure out of alignment. Now, right where the brain ends and turns into the spinal cord, called the brainstem, this level right here is the most important point of communication in the nervous system, where the brain starts to communicate to the body, because it's where all the spinal nerves starts to branch off and start to communicate to all the cells. And also, when a baby is born like that, it's also extremely stressful emotionally and mentally. And that can be the beginning of a subluxation pattern for them throughout their nervous system. Now, this is what brings us to the purpose of chiropractic. So the purpose of chiropractic is to work with subluxation. The purpose of chiropractic is the adjustment, because the adjustment is going to begin to integrate and dissipate that information that's been stored as tension. And as that information is integrated and dissipated, and that tension comes down, the structure now has an opportunity to come back into its most appropriate alignment. And when the structure comes back into its most appropriate alignment, that means the brain and the body has an opportunity to start communicating with each other again, which means the brain and the endocrine system can communicate optimally with one another again, which means we have an opportunity for a balanced chemistry of life, which drives all function. So we have an opportunity for function to be expressed to its fullest potential. And this allows that inborn wisdom, that innate intelligence of the body to be expressed throughout the whole entire body. But most importantly, what it means is that the human being has a chance to uncover their potential and express their life to their fullest capability. And that ultimately is the purpose of chiropractic, to allow the human being to express their life and their potential to its fullest capability. So when I look at the body, I see the body as an instrument. That's the easiest way for me to see it. It's an instrument of life. And we're the musicians. And the music is our life. So every time we practice a piece of music, that instrument needs to be in tune. And every time we perform, that instrument needs to be in tune. But there's not a time in our life where we're not practicing or we're not performing. So the more the body, the more the nervous system and the body in general is in tune, the greater we're going to be able to perform or express our lives to its fullest potential. And that's the purpose of chiropractic. I hope you guys enjoy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mattie.